Tony, great to see you.
Great to be here.
You know, what's so interesting, every single day, I either watch the news or read the newspaper, and I'm so intrigued by the headlines.
Yep.
And you and I have talked about this many, many times over the years, and that is, you know, one of our jobs as real estate professionals is to disarm and interpret the media, because the media, in my 40 years, has never, ever been our friend. I thought it'd be super fun if we took a look at some headlines, fact, fiction, perception, reality. What is today's reality?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. You want to read the headline?
I'm going to read the headline.
All right, let's read it.
I love it. I'm going to have to put my glasses on. It's what happens.
Yeah, okay.
I lose this. The lose real estate market in 2025. Now, lose. Tell me what comes to your mind when you think lose, and you're someone reading that headline.
Well, if I'm reading that headline, lose means everybody's losing. The buyer's losing, the seller's losing, the market's terrible. Why would I want to get into real estate? Why would I buy a house? Why would I sell a house if I'm losing?
Right.
I mean, that's insanity.
Right. And so the funny thing when I read that is I quickly said, it kind of feels to me like it's win-win.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's a matter of how we look at things, and it's also about having a perspective of where we've been. So, you know, you are such a student of our business. I would love for you to share just a couple of your observations of why you think it's a win-win, not a lose-lose, why it is a great time to buy, why it is a great time to sell. Where are the headwinds and where are the tailwinds?
Well, let me give you an analogy, especially around the title. I like where you're going. It's a win-win. The market is balanced again. It's returned to health. So you go to the doctor. When you go to the doctor's office, what word do you like to hear? Healthy,
Yeah.
right? So why would we feel different in real estate? With the balanced market, in the last 3 or 4 years, that pandemic that came in really turned our real estate upside down in the sense that you had mortgage rates that we haven't seen since 1970. You had buyers moving at the speed of sound to buy a house. Sellers could price their property, whatever. We were selling houses in 6 seconds. I mean, we had 6 people lined up to buy. That's not healthy, and it's not sustainable. And so what's happening now is the market has readjusted back to pre-pandemic. I always like to say 2019,
right,
which seems like another lifetime ago. Buyers are sitting at the table. Sellers are sitting at the table. They're both negotiating. Buyers are having more properties to see. Inventory is returning. More options. And sellers, believe it or not, are still getting the prices. They're still getting price appreciation. As I always like to say, the asset is working. So it's a really good time to be in the market. It's a win-win.
Yeah, so I totally agree on the win-win. I think, you know, it's about a perspective. And, you know, we think about this increase in inventory. Boy, I've read multiple articles that suggest that this increase in inventory has shifted every market across America to be a buyer's market, not a seller's market. And it's interesting. In Charlotte, and I'm just going to use Canopy here in Charlotte, month supply of inventory is up 36.8%. Now, if I just read that, Tony, and that was the number I leaned in on, say in a headline, it doesn't tell me that now month supply of inventory is 3.2 months,
right,
and 6 months has been known for years historically and traditionally as that break even when a seller's market becomes a buyer's market. So I think what's happening is inventory is up. Days on the market is grown. I think percentage of listings, active listings in the market that have had price changes across this country is like 36%. I was in Virginia not long ago, and in Williamsburg, it's 32%. So if I'm reading that data, I think as a buyer, man, I'm in control. Right. And the fact of the matter is, it is better than it was, which, to your point, becomes much more normal.
Right.
Right. And so from a buyer's perspective, the other stat I saw which really resonated with me, I had a chance to see the gentleman named Ryan Price. He's the chief economist for Virginia Association of Realtors. And what he showed is he showed a graph that had the average mortgage rate of 6.8%. And then it had the average mortgage holders rate in the state of Virginia of 4.1%. So you could be fixated on 6.8, couldn't you?
That's right.
You could be fixated on 4.1. I became fixated on the gap.
Yep.
The difference between 6.8 and 4.1 is 2.7. I can have a conversation about that, right? One of the numbers I was hoping to get before you and I had a chance to chat is what's the stock market doing? Like, we're in the 43,000 Dow, we're in the 6,000 S&P. There is tremendous wealth out there. And so I think you and I agree, it's not a lose-lose market. Probably been a long time since it's been such a win-win market.
That's right. And think about what your comment about stock. Every financial trader I've ever worked with says you play the long game. With your 401k, you keep it. No matter what the market does, whether it goes up or as it goes down, you stay consistent. Well, guess what real estate is? Yeah. Real estate is the long game. And as long as you're in there in the asset, there have been maybe 2 times where we saw price depreciation in the last 30 years. And that was the 08-09 market that crashed, but it's been steady ever since. So we get caught in these headlines, and it's just not true.
Well, let's shift. I'm going to shift gears because there's another headline that I think you and I found rather interesting, and it really has to do with mortgage interest rates. You know, that's been a huge topic of conversation. You talked about historically low in 2020 and 2021, like 2.5%, 2.75. Yep. I often look back to 86, 87, and 88 when I sold. The average interest rate back then was 10.31%.
Yeah.
And you and I chatted yesterday. At that time, there were 3.3 million existing homes sold in this country when population was like 241 million. Today, population is like 345 million, and only 4 million homes were sold. But prices, think about what prices have done since 1987. Would have loved to have bought a house in 87 and not sold it. Let's talk about interest rates. I love this. Why mortgage rates surged.
Yeah.
Let's talk about surge.
Well, let's just define the word surge. So the way I think about this, remember when we were kids and we go to the beach and we go get in the ocean? We were probably, 4 foot tall maybe at that time, and this 6 foot wave comes at you and it takes you out. Next thing you know, you're underwater, you're trying to find your way just to get back up. I would define that as a surge.
Right.
I don't relate that experience with what we're seeing with mortgage rates. Now, have we had a surge of mortgage rates? Yeah. I will tell you in 2022 going into 2023, we saw, you mentioned it before, the lowest rates we'd ever seen in our careers.
Right.
They moved from 3% in 2023 at the beginning to 8% in one 10-month window, less than 1 year. I would call that a surge.
One would argue that that's a surge.
That is a surge. That's a movement of 5 interest points.
And remember what caused that. It was actually June of 2022.
Yep.
Inflation numbers came out at 9.1%, and interest rates went over 8%.
Yep.
And so the beauty of today is, and why I find this headline interesting, intriguing, and confusing, is because 6 3/8 went to 6 5/8. Like, that's not a surge.
Yeah.
You know, and each and every day that rates stay in the 6s, it goes back to your comment about our previous headline. That becomes the more norm. And consumers today, every day it's in the 6s, it becomes a more normal. 2.5, 2.75, 3 1/4. I'm going to go on the record today. Like, if anybody's waiting for that, you're going to miss an opportunity to buy a property today and miss out on the appreciating home value. Granted, not double digits that we've seen, but certainly 3 to 5, 3 to 5, 3 to 5, which we can count on in our business each and every year.
Well, and I have to tell you, the whole headline confused me because mortgage rates actually decreased, not increased. So were we surging downwards? I didn't quite understand it. And we hit 7% last year. It's actually on an average about 6.85, but let's tell the clients out there what's really happening. We're seeing the sellers getting their price. So if we were to make an offer on that $400,000 house, buyer has some options maybe to make less. I'll offer $390,000, that $10,000. Why not take that $10,000 and offer $400,000, get the seller to pay $10,000 in concessions specifically to buying my rate down, and that would $10,000 would buy you 2.5 points down. And there's also the 2-1 buy downs, the 3-2-1 buy downs. Why not use that? You could take $10,000 to save you $165 a month on your mortgage payment. Well, you take that $165 savings over 30 years if you were to stay there the whole time. I think that's a lot more than $10,000.
Absolutely.
And so, boy, am I so confused when I read that headline.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing is just take a program that Hanna Mortgage has. the loyalty lending program for $1,000.
Right.
Remember, what interest rate I have today is temporary.
Yep.
And I think so often we get fixated on that number, maybe because my neighbor bought in 2021 and they're telling me about this. And I think the other thing is we have a document, and we've looked at it time and time again. It's called the cost of waiting.
Yep.
And what it does is it compares the savings in waiting for an interest rate to get, say, starting with a 5
Right.
versus the appreciating home value.
Right.
And one of the things that I think is so critically important to our business is, yes, it's the American dream, but it's also this vehicle for everyone to build generational wealth. And again, I think about the two headlines we've just discussed. Number one, market is lose-lose. 2, interest rates are surging. If I was indifferent to the market and I read those two and I didn't sit with my trusted advisor and I didn't sit with Tony Jarrett and have somebody explain to me the numbers behind the numbers, I'm not getting in the business. Number one, I'm certainly not going to be an agent.
Yep.
And number two, I'm not going to buy and sell. I'm going to be paralyzed by the headline, not necessarily the content.
Yep.
Let's grab another one. You got another headline in there?
Yeah, there's, well, this would be a great one for you to answer. This is specifically to Charlotte. Charlotte listings linger. Average days selling up to 57 days. There's another word, linger.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
So let's think about perspective. One of the things that, if you remember, Matthew Farrar taught us was every number that you hear has numbers that surround it. And in order to understand the number, you have to have a feeling of what surrounded it. So at 57 days. So what was it a year ago? Let's think back from a perspective. It was 43, right? In the heyday, it was 21. 1987, it was 97. So think about that. 57 days, less than 2 months. Month supply of inventory in the Charlotte market, 3.2 months, when 6 becomes what I call the equilibrium, when a buyer's market or when a seller's market becomes a buyer's market. So again, if you take 14 against 43, boy, days on the market are up 33% or 14 days. If I just read that, but I don't have perspective, then I'm going to consider it to be an issue. So a couple things. There's more listings.
Yep.
And I think the other thing, and I think it's really important to understand that pricing today is as important as it has ever been, simply because many sellers continue to lean in on what they saw their neighbors do in the last 24 to 36 months, not necessarily today's snapshot. Now, they also forget, Tony, that they've had an average appreciation in 4 years of 57%, and by the time they're paying down their mortgage, their equity buildup is 74%.
Right.
And our mortgage leader today told us, as we looked at it, our average sale price is up, their average loan amount is down, and the average percentage is a 34% down. Why? Equity is king today, and
right.
There's the opportunity.
That's right. Well, let me give you a few stats that I've read today based on what we heard, and this is in May. For the first time since 2019, we have over 1 million for sale signs in the United States. That's the highest level in the last 5 years. So it relates back to what you said, that our word would be competition. Suddenly your competition, you better price it right to begin with because you have a lot more competition out there. The sellers, 8 out of 10, the last survey said 80%, 8 out of 10 thought their house was worth more than the market. That's probably our toughest job right now, is really talking about pricing it right based on the comps, because you said it best. The comps the sellers are using are 2 or 3 years ago, where we need to look at the last 6 months.
And I think the other thing that is critically important when we think about this pricing component is that it is so important to understand that the real estate market today is hyper local.
That's right.
So when we think about headlines, we read a headline and it might be in USA Today, it might be in the Wall Street Journal, it might be in the Charlotte Observer. Even a Charlotte Observer stat might be drawn from a national publication like Case-Shiller, and that may not speak to Matthews and Mint Hill, and that may not speak to Statesville. And so the importance of that trusted advisor is so incredibly important today more than ever, I think.
Well, let's go back to the definition of linger, because it was in the headline. The definition is to stay in place longer than necessary because of a reluctance to leave. So what seller doesn't want to leave the real estate market? It doesn't make any sense to me. In 57 days, I'm reluctant to leave? No, you probably missed it by the price. Let's readjust and hit it right to begin with.
The other thing you mentioned is, we can't go back 2 years to look at comparables. You said we got to go back 6 months. I'm going to take it a step further. I think that we have to be careful only to go to comparables.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those unique markets where I got to go to active listing inventory that I am competing with.
That's right.
And I had a conversation the other day, and I said, I think the most significant asset a real estate professional can bring to a seller is, number one, I tour every single listing that is your competitor, and I monitor that every day. If one sells, I owe my seller, did that agent that sold that house show mine?
Yeah.
If they did, why did they buy? The realtor today, the real estate professional today, has to take extra steps to connect and to communicate, because if you're going to get the price right, it's got to have some data behind it. It's not what I think. It's not what I feel.
Right.
It's here is data. And even something that closed 60 days ago, I want to know. Today, I list Tony Jarrett's house. Today, there are 6 listings that are your competition, within a 10% price range. I have to monitor those like a hawk.
Right.
And I got to call those listing agents every week. Are you having showings? Are you not having showings? And then I owe that feedback back to the. I know we've gotten offline here from the headlines, but it is such an important time for our agents and the industry to understand that information is power when it comes to pricing, when it comes to negotiation, and when it comes to determining win-win.
Well, and your point is so well made, because our definition of comps is closed sold properties. We have a colleague of ours, Mark Bardot, who always says most relevant properties, and I love that line, because the most relevant is what you said. It's a lot of times is who I'm competing with active. I used to always call it the ping pong effect. I don't want to play ping pong, meaning the buyers are going to bounce off that house, my house, because it's overpriced, and bounce off me, and they confirm they want to buy that one. Don't play ping pong, play to win.
All right, I got another headline. And it's interesting because it speaks and I'll read a little bit of inside it, Tony, but the headline says 14 U.S. cities where the housing market feels weirdly frozen right now. And here it says, Raleigh, North Carolina, which we operate in, is another pandemic favorite that's cooled off considerably. While population growth continues, the real estate market isn't keeping pace. Buyers are struggling with price fatigue and rising interest rate, while sellers remain stuck on pre-2023 pricing. I would actually go back a little bit further. The result, a classic freeze. I'm going to suggest that in looking at how we are performing in that market, it has not frozen.
No.
The market is up. Good for us. We're up above the market, but it's different.
That's right.
It's not frozen. It's simply different. And I know from being in this business, we could not sustain 20 and 21. It was unsustainable.
Right.
Right? You're coming soon on a Friday, 72 listings on a Saturday, 18 offers, due diligence out of control. And one of the things we've learned is there are a fair amount of people that bought homes during that time frame, which kind of got caught in the euphoria of it. And today, because their circumstances changed, they may be what they call interest rate locked. I just can't, it's not the right house for me today, but I just can't leave 2.5.
That's right.
Right?
Until life happens, and then life's going to make
happens.
Yeah, life's going to happen. So go back to the headline, which really threw me off on this one. It was a double whammy. It was weirdly frozen. Not just frozen, but weirdly frozen, which I didn't quite understand. But frozen to me means nothing's happening.
Nothing's happening.
Nothing. Let me give you some stats on Raleigh. The market is up 22%. So that's a big movement. Let's go back to the other one. That's a surge of active for sale signs. Buyers suddenly have a lot more options in Raleigh. And by the way, this is just Raleigh itself. Days on the market is a healthy 45 days. Monthly supply is 2.5 months. That's really leaning towards balance. Price appreciation is up 2%. So sellers aren't taking a step back. They're not frozen. It's moving forward. And list price to close price is 99% in Raleigh. I think these numbers are pretty healthy, but then I said, all right, let's look at frozen as far as sales. The city of Raleigh, 6,451 properties closed these past 12 months. That's down from 6,565. That's 114.
You're right.
That's it. There's over 6,000 properties selling just in the city of Raleigh, and that's frozen? Oh, I'm sorry, weirdly frozen?
Yeah, exactly. It's not just frozen. Frozen would be that 6,500 goes to 1,500. That would be frozen.
The math just doesn't add up for me.
So I think about, I've always wanted to do this, Tony. I've always wanted to start a news channel that was only good news. And what I was told is that I would have one person paying any attention to it, and it would be me.
Bingo.
Right? Because I would be inspired by good news. So let's just play a game for a minute. So let's take our headlines we've talked about today. The lose-lose housing market. You and I would say the win-win housing market, and we would walk people through why buy now, why sell now, generational wealth. Interest rate today is temporary. We've got buy downs. We've got mortgage programs. Then we go to, I love this one, why have mortgage rates surged? I would say, the headline might be, ask your realtor how to leverage today's interest rates to have home ownership.
Yeah.
The average first-time home buyer in 2024 was 38 years old.
Yeah.
That group has missed 10 years of generational wealth. Think about the last 5.
Right.
Think about the last 5. If those people, if those individuals had bought a home in 2019 at age 33,
yep,
they would have made 57% appreciating home value. Their equity would be up 74%. And they missed it because it was different than they thought it was going to be.
Well, and what we heard from a lot of these buyers then is they didn't want to jump into it because they didn't want to get into a frenzy, a fighting frenzy. Now they don't want to get into it because it's surging in the wrong way or lose-lose. These headlines make no sense to me.
So Charlotte listings linger, average selling days market. So it might be perfect time to buy. More listings hit the market. More choices for buyers.
Yes.
Not nearly as competitive on that singular house that you may want to be passionate about.
That's right.
And again, unfortunately, our experience tells us, we always talk about it, perception is reality. And if we don't read the third paragraph, where it really tells the story, what really inspired this kind of headline thing for me was about 6 weeks ago, Wall Street Journal. And the headline of the Wall Street Journal said, buyers have the advantage. Like that was the headline in the Wall Street Journal. So now you read through it, and here's what it says. Inventory up. True. Average days on the market up. True. Percentage listings with a price change up. Everything that was in the body was true. But the summary headline could not have been more wrong.
Right.
And that's the challenge. But I actually think it's the greatest opportunity we have as real estate professionals to take the time. We talk about this as a relationship business. It is not transactional.
Right.
Take the time, face to face, belly to belly, and educate our sphere, our client's children, because in the absence of our people doing their job to that extent, people are going to pay attention to the headlines.
Sure. And the last headline, instead of saying weirdly frozen, how about it's weirdly healthy right now?
Yeah.
And why not come back to health? Why not jump back in and do everything you said?
It's healthy again. You and I did a podcast not long ago, and you talked, I think it was a soft seller's market. A soft seller's market.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's relative.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. So, one of the things that you and I are going to try to do about every 6 weeks is just, kind of hit some headlines. We talked about fact or fiction, perception, reality. What is today's reality? And, I'm hoping that anybody that gets a chance to view what we've just shared can take something with it, take a nugget with it, grab a piece of great information you've shared, call their real estate professional who happens to work for the Allen Tate Company, and get more information.
That's pretty good.
All right.
Back in the day, we could have done this sitting here with coffee in our pajamas reading the newspaper. Now we got to read every headline from an email and a social media. It's just all over the place.
Yeah, and I'm afraid to drink water for the fear I spill it all over.
Well, here, this is how you do it.
Cheers.
Cheers, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.